What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with a spoiler-free review for Immaculate, starring the lovely Sydney Sweeney. It just had its premiere at the South by Southwest Film Festival yesterday, and it's coming our way on March 22nd, which is why I'm doing no spoilers. This was a little early access fan screening down at the Alamo Drafthouse in Brooklyn. And speaking of the Alamo Drafthouse, they continued to up their game when it comes to what they show before movies. They were showing the trailer to the 1986 or 1985 original Vampire Hunter D. I was like, all right, y'all are speaking my language. But what also was speaking my language was this movie, because it is a lean and mean and gnarly little horror movie. And it has a very good chance of resurrecting I think it's a subgenre that a lot of people don't even know that it exists, but the nunsploitation subgenre and the definition of what actually goes into making a nunsploitation film. It's a little vague. It all depends upon, your tastes and preferences. It's very subjective. But I feel like if you're making a movie that kind of looks like a dignified art film and it's beautifully photographed and it has a movie star, but it also contains ingredients that you would expect to see like in a drive-in horror movie from the early 1970s or late 60s, well, then you're probably well on your way to becoming a nunsploitation classic. And while the movie didn't completely, totally step down the gas pedal on all the ingredients that I like to see in a horror movie, it came close enough where I was laughing and recoiling and screaming. And when the movie ended and the titles came up, the first thing out of my mouth was, "Oh my fucking God." And the rest of the crowd was right there with me. I feel like if you're going to see this movie, don't wait for a streamer. Don't wait for it to be available on digital. See it with a crowd, because the crowd response was half the fun, because there's some sick, nasty stuff scattered throughout this movie where you could just hear the crowd either cracking up as a way of kind of relieving the tension, or they were just just gagging in revulsion at some of the stuff on display. But what is Immaculate, you might be asking? It makes me immediately think of Jim Morrison. For some reason, in all of his songs for the Doors, every once in a while, he's just Immaculate. He just would throw that shit out there like it was some really heavy shit. He thought he was a poet. Maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't. But the premise for Immaculate is as such. A devoutly religious woman named Cecilia is offered a role at an illustrious convent in the Italian countryside. Her seemingly picture-perfect new home is soon revealed to hold horrifying secrets. And that's pretty good. I'm going to be real careful about not revealing any of the major plot revelations or any of the kind of the nastiest moments that this movie contains. But what is not up for debate, at least in my eyes, I think Sydney Sweeney has become a full-blown box office draw. And if you've been following my channel for any length of time, you'll know that I basically define a movie star as an actor or an actress where you go to see the movie for them, not necessarily the filmmaker or the franchise or the book that it's based on. The movie star is the draw. And the reason this movie popped up on my radar at all was because of Sydney Sweeney. And obviously, she's been doing good stuff for a long time. She was great in Euphoria. She was really good in season 1 of White Lotus. And she's popped up here and there, in small roles and things like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And obviously recently she had the misfortune of being included in Madam Web, but she bounced back and she was making fun of the movie on Saturday Night Live while showing off two of the biggest reasons why everybody is in love with Sydney Sweeney. But the big debate is, does she have chops? Is she going to be another Denise Richards from the late 90s, or does she have chops? Is she an actress? And I think this movie will prove once and for all, after people have experienced the final 5 to 10 minutes, they're like, oh my God, I had no idea that she was more than just a pretty face with 2 giant assets at her disposal. She can fucking act, and she's fantastic in this. But the filmmakers involved in this endeavor are director Michael Mohan, who previously directed her in the movie The Voyeurs. I did not see The Voyeurs, although there are many scenes. Well, I strongly recommend you go to MrSkin.com and look up The Voyeurs and enjoy everything that movie has to offer. But I guess the feature attraction of this movie is writer Andrew Lobel, or Lobel, Lobel. I don't know if I've seen any movies, but let me do a quick IMDb and see if I've seen any of his previous work. But I'll be following his work from now on, because he wrote just a lean and mean, nasty little horror movie. So he is speaking my language. So his previous writing credits, 2 shorts, a little bit on the TV series Mysteries Unknown, and this is his first feature. More power to you, dude. I'll be watching the movies from here on out. Also interesting, on IMDb, people are rating this movie 5.7. I don't know. It only just premiered yesterday, and I think only 6 critics have seen it. So I think that the number, you could expect it to go way up or way down in the coming weeks as more people see it. And what impressed me about his writing was that he was able to get me invested in what I would describe as religious horror again. I grew up on a pretty steady diet of those kinds of movies, whether you're talking about Rosemary's Baby or The Exorcist or The Omen. There were a lot of movies that had like religious themes where you didn't have to be religious to enjoy them, but it definitely helped me. I was raised Episcopalian. I was confirmed. These days, I only go to church for weddings, funerals, and as well as the christenings of my nieces and nephews. But, you know, if you're growing up in a I always say like Episcopalians is like the religion for Southerners, for people who actually don't want to go to church or be all that religious. Some people might reject or push back on that characterization, but that is what it felt like growing up in my household, where like people weren't necessarily that religious, but we had just enough religion in our diet or in our culture where a religiously themed horror movie could have like extra special impact depending upon like your level of belief or how devout you were. And I think one of the reasons movies like The Exorcist have so much power is that if you're an atheist, you can totally relate to the character of Chris, you know, the mother of the girl who is a non-believer in that story. But if you are Catholic or, you know, have a sympathetic view of Catholics, you're going to walk away from The Exorcist thinking, well, Catholics are basically Batman and Superman, like all rolled into one. Like, oh my God, like what fucking studs. And so I feel like The Exorcist did a brilliant job of being really powerful horror for anybody, irrespective of their religious beliefs. Which brings me back to my very vague definition of nunsploitation. And I must admit, I'm not a connoisseur of nunsploitation. I've seen some of the trashier ones, and I've seen some of the outright classics. But if you're wondering, what the hell does this word even mean? Like Killer Nun is probably the most obvious example of nunsploitation. And it's good, trashy fun. Or movies like To the Devil, a Daughter, which has some wildly inappropriate nudity in it. But if you like Christopher Lee and you like Hammer horror, definitely check it out. But I think the real nunsploitation classics, like if you want to talk about like great classic dignified cinema, Powell and Pressburger's Black Narcissus. The movie is so good, I almost kind of hesitate to even associate it with nunsploitation, even if nuns are at the core of the story. But that movie is incredibly powerful and beautifully photographed, and one of the best movies of the 1940s. And some people have characterized the silent horror film Haksan as nunsploitation. I would describe it as like nunsploitation adjacent. You got Miss 45, the Abel Ferrara film, where she's not a nun, but she dresses as a nun as she's running around blowing people's heads off. And if you like down and dirty, mean and nasty movies about New York, tread lightly, but Miss 45, it packs a serious punch. But probably the best, my favorites, would have to be, there are two. There's a recent example, Benedetta by Paul Verhoeven, which I thought was one of the best nunsploitation films ever made. And it has all the kind of lurid sexual ingredients that I wish were in Immaculate. Immaculate, it's got partial nudity. It's suggested, and it's basically you have like a lot of nuns in gowns, like all bathing together. So there's a little bit there to kind of titillate the senses and that sort of thing. But it doesn't go all in. It's much more about gore, violence, torture, puke, vomit, just shit, all kinds of gross stuff. I mean, it more than makes up for its lack of nudity with its abundance of violent, horrible stuff going on. But the all-time great nunsploitation movie has to be the 1971 classic by Ken Russell, The Devils. I saw that on VHS back in college and it knocked me flat, but then I rediscovered it many years later when I got to see it at a screening at Yonkers here in New York with a bunch of fellow film freaks, including Lacey Tribble Russell, the widow of Ken Russell. And it was one of the most powerful movie-going experiences that I ever experienced, where it was an entire room just transfixed by this awe-inspiring, just shocking and controversial, and that movie is bananas. There are many reasons why 1971 is my favorite year of filmmaking, but The Devils is a huge part of it. If you've never seen The Devils and you're curious about this subcategory or subgenre of horror, definitely start with The Devils. But if your taste in film runs toward the contemporary, Immaculate will be a great appetizer to kind of get you ready for discovering more films in this category of horror. So what can we discuss without giving anything away? First and foremost, high five to Sydney Sweeney for agreeing to do this movie. Obviously, she'd worked with the director before in his previous movie, The Voyeurs, but this was not necessarily a slam dunk in advance because Neon, they did not acquire this movie until December. I think they saw that it was about to play at South by Southwest, made an offer, snatched it up. So it's a Neon movie, but they acquired it. So Neon's got a very prestigious brand. I feel like they are almost as strong or almost as reputable as a company like A24, and they're getting there fast. They're putting together a pretty impressive library. I'm rooting hard for Neon all the way, and the fact that they're willing to make an 88 or 89 minute just savage little horror movie about a girl who suddenly has through immaculate conception, a baby in her belly, in spite of the fact that she has been a devout nun her entire life. She is She is innocent when it comes to the ways of men and the outside world. She is a true believer, and she's moved to Italy because her, I don't know if it's called a parish or wherever she was working in America, there wasn't enough of enough attendance to justify keeping it going. So she's been reassigned. And immediately she realizes that there's some really strange, weird stuff going on. And the very first scene of the movie clues the audience in that there is something very rotten in Denmark. Horrible, violent, dirty deeds are being done after dark. So tread lightly if you walk into the walls of this convent. But what's great is how this movie doesn't throw you into the deep end of the pool immediately. It lets you kind of ease into the really disturbing things that are coming your way, because part of the duties for the nuns at this convent is looking after the dying nuns. It was established like 400 years ago where like really old nuns could go there to like die with dignity. And so the nuns, they're constantly doing things like examining the fecal matter of their patients and so on. And you're just watching, it's like, I mean, it's truly gross, repugnant stuff. So you're already kind of conditioned to see and kind of react to really foul stuff. But like I said, it's very mundane. It's, it's puke, it's blood, it's poop. It's all the things that we are all too familiar with, but probably prefer not to see on the big screen. But then things start to get really weird. First and foremost, Sydney Sweeney is pregnant, and all the girls seem to be very jealous, and they all seem to be looking at her or kind of like regarding her with a sort of like religious awe. And the few men who work there, one of whom's a priest and one of whom's a doctor, they are like doing everything in their power to kind of keep her or protect her from the outside world, which initially makes her incredibly suspicious. Like, I want to go to the doctor. Like, oh, we have a doctor right here. Like, you don't need to leave, blah, blah, blah. And she slowly but surely starts to realize not only is she a prisoner, but that many nuns have been down this road before where they've experienced a lot of things that she's experienced, where sometimes horrible things will happen in the night, or she's not quite sure if they're a dream or if she's really seeing what she thinks she's seeing. And then things start to get really violent with like certain nuns in the convent lashing out at her, and then some of those nuns meeting horrible fates. And just it keeps escalating. What's incredible is how this movie is so short and so lean and so fast. I didn't even go to the bathroom once. I was like, holy shit, I don't want to miss anything. It moves at such a rapid clip, and it just keeps escalating because it's kind of divided into the various trimesters of her pregnancy. And by the time you get to the end, it's just like, oh my fucking Lord, I don't know if I can take where this flick is going. But very wisely, this movie chose to include certain scenes that allow you to kind of laugh at the absurdity of just the extreme content that's unfolding before your eyes. And it's not because people are laughing at the movie's expense. I can't stand movies where like, oh, it's so stupid, you can just laugh at it, blah, blah, blah. Like, I've got no time or interest in movies like that. But it is kind of, I guess, like disturbing humor. Like you'll know it when you see it, or you'll know it when you hear it, because the crowd kept laughing uproariously at certain scenes because it was like their only defense for what was happening. But what was great is how Sydney Sweeney's not one of those, she doesn't play one of those characters where you're constantly pulling her hair out in frustration. Like, well, why doesn't she just do this? Like, why doesn't she just hit somebody in the head with like a giant fucking hammer? Why doesn't she just set someone on fire? Like, why doesn't she rise up and defend herself? Because she does. I mean, Sydney Sweeney as a character, about halfway through the movie, she's like, these people are fucking crazy, and she starts taking certain steps to protect herself. And it's incredibly satisfying watching the lead character really like rise into the occasion and fucking people up. And so, yeah, I cannot say enough about Sydney Sweeney. I think a lot of people have misjudged her just because she is so physically attractive. And when you're incredibly beautiful, no one wants to acknowledge that perhaps you also have talent or ability or chops. And she totally does. So the big question is, like, should you throw down money to see this in the theater? This is not some big, giant $200 million film that demands to be seen in IMAX. But I think a part of the theater experience, in addition to obviously having a big, beautiful canvas and incredible sound and that sort of thing, a big part of the movie experience with a movie like this is just hearing people losing their shit, like myself included. I was verbally cackling and or screaming throughout a lot of it. Is it going to withstand the test of time like a movie like The Devils? I mean, who the hell knows? The Devils is over 50 years old, and I think it's in a lot of ways, it's kind of one of a kind. And that era of filmmaking will never come again. Where just something about the early 70s, just in that one year, the fact that you had Straw Dogs, Clockwork Orange, and The Devils all in the same year being made by major studios, it's like, I think they might have even all been made by the same studio. It's like, what were they smoking over? I think it was all Warner Brothers, but actually, I don't think Straw Dogs was Warner Brothers, but I believe that Clockwork Orange definitely was. In any case, 1971, great year for really disturbing movie made by like legendary auteurs operating at the highest level Like it's way too premature to give those accolades to a movie like Immaculate, but it is a damn good time at the movies. You will not be bored, that I can promise you, and you will walk out of there like, oh my god, like, well, let's go to a bar and talk about this, because you're going to want to dissect and kind of analyze and critique all the juicy little details, especially from the second half of the movie. And in a lot of ways, I feel like movies like this might be the answer to a lot of the movie business problems. Like, bring the budgets back down to earth, back to like the realm like where a sane person would consider giving a green light to these movies. Like a heavy emphasis on genre with really glamorous, beautiful movie stars. Like, you are off to the races. You don't need much more than that. Whether you're talking about like a great film noir or thriller or a great horror movie or a great comedy. Like Sydney Sweeney, she just appeared in, can't remember the name of it. What the hell is that movie she made? Like two months ago, but it made $200 million. This is ridiculous. I didn't see it, so I'm not that embarrassed that I can't remember, but it was called, I think, Anyone But You, with Glenn Howell or Powell or whatever the fuck his name is. He's a handsome devil as well. Yeah, Anyone But You. That movie's done really well internationally, and if she can appear in these kind of modest, like low-budget movies and generate big box office, what you are seeing is the birth of a thing that we used to call movie stars, where people will go to see Sydney Sweeney as opposed to the director or the concept. And also, I mean, I'm obsessed with directors. The reason I'm into movies at all is because I admire a whole host of really strong directors. But as a business, as a money-making enterprise, the business does need movie stars. So here is a new movie star coming into being, and I'm rooting for Sydney Sweeney all the way, especially if she keeps landing on and figuring out cool projects like this. Like, the less said about Madam Web, the better. But, Madam Web was a month ago. We've moved on to Immaculate, and people in the showbiz have very short memories. So long story short, if you like seeing torture and bodily dismemberment and diarrhea and blood and childbirth and all kinds of crazy graphic things in your entertainment with a little hint or a little tease of nudity just for good measure, you will be entertained by Immaculate. And in the end, that is what show business is supposed to be all about, delivering entertainment for a reasonable price. So go see Immaculate. I hope I've helped put this movie on some people's radar, and I'll be rooting for it all the way once it gets a wider release next week. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. If so, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel. More importantly, hitting that notification bell. That's more important than even subscribing. But I hope everybody has a great week. I'll be back at y'all tomorrow with a review of Knox Goes Away, the new Michael Keaton thriller. In any case, thanks again for watching, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.